This episode, go on, get out of here. You got everything you came for. Welcome back to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. We're continuing our look at different record labels that influenced us and record labels that we loved over the years. This is our look at Polyvinyl Records, and my guest today is none other than Bob Nanna from the band Braid and Hey Mercedes, and in recent times he's got his solo project going on. Bob's been a guy that's been around in the scene, the post-hardcore scene, for years. Of course, Braid being one of those influential bands of time. So we're going to talk about that, talk about some of my favorite records that Bob has released from Braid, including the Braid reunion and his time in Hey Mercedes, all the good stuff. We're going to chat about that, but of course he's here to share his 5 favorite releases from Polyvinyl Records, so we're going to dive into that as well. Before we get to the interview, though, let's get the housekeeping out of the way. Go follow us on Facebook. Yeah, sure, you can follow us on Facebook, but what I meant to say was Instagram and Twitter at Growing Punk Pod. You'll find our personal Instagrams and Twitters there as well. Of course, our website, growingpunkpod.com. We've got merch that's available there. We've also got the Patreon if you just want to become a monthly supporter, if you like what we're doing here. We've also got blogs and different reviews that pop up on there from time to time. And of course, wherever you are listening to this or watching it, subscribe, thumbs up, rate it, review it, whatever you need to do, wherever you're taking it in. Tell your friends all about it. Anyways, let's not waste any more time. This is my conversation with Bob Nanna from Braid and Hey Mercedes about his 5 favorite releases on Polyvinyl Records. First of all, I guess thanks for doing this. This was kind of almost happenstance. I think I commented on something. You referred to your house as the Nanna Dome.
And which is a problem. I should have called it Nanna Manor.
Nanna Manor. That's pretty good too. But I saw it on Twitter and I was like, that's hilarious, the Nanna Dome. And so here we are anyway, after a few Twitter exchanges back and forth. But
we made it happen.
We made it happen. And so thanks again for doing this. But I thought we could start like going way back to the beginning. Do you remember
childbirth?
Yeah, exactly. Do you remember childbirth? Do you remember kind of like the first punk band album, show, whatever it was that kind of like introduced you to the whole DIY kind of punk world?
Yes. It was when I was in grade school, so 7th grade, 8th grade, I started to get into like more like metal. Right. And before that, I was more into like top 40 stuff and whatever was on the radio or on MTV. But towards the end of my grade school, I started listening to metal and started listening to maybe some of the counter, what was the counter mainstream sort of stuff. And then that led me to learn about like hardcore.
Sure, yeah.
Like, so... and I was also getting a little bit interested in the local bands. I grew up in Chicago. I live in Chicago. I'm born and bred and born and raised. So I was starting getting into some of like what the local metal scene was, even though I was so young. It's not like I could go to shows or anything like that.
Right.
But I could go to stores and see what local tapes and stuff they had for sale. When I went to high school was when I was introduced to Fugazi.
Sure, yeah.
So it was my, when I started getting into hardcore, people were like, oh, Minor Threat and Black Flag and even like some of the more metal ones like DRI and stuff like that. But when I got to high school and someone said, oh, you like Minor Threat, you should check out Fugazi. And this was 89.
Right.
To let you know how old I am. And then I remember this so vividly because you asked, was there a specific show or something that maybe changed my life or like changed the trajectory of my my life?
It's got to where you are. Where you are now.
It was Fugazi. I saw Fugazi play on June 14th, 1990 here in Chicago. And it was my 15th birthday. And it was completely life-changing because I saw a band that was not like what you heard on the radio. They had a lot of energy, but yet this sort of like DIY or like this ethos where it was like they at parts of the set they had people come on stage and play their instruments. it was just like a complete, like my mind was wiped clean of like hair metal or the
Yeah.
pomp of like being a front person on stage or whatever, and just being like, it really brought it to a level that made me think I belong here. I could do that. And when I do that, I want to do it like that, you know? So
Yeah.
that was 100% of the show.
It's incredible the number of times, you know, you just kind of like Fugazi, just such an insane band when you think about it. Because when I like that question, I've asked that to a number of different people, and the number of times that Fugazi is kind of that first band that really set it off for them. And I mean, I remember hearing about Fugazi, like obviously I'm a few years younger than you, but Fugazi, I don't know if they, by the time I'd heard of them, I don't know if they ever came up here. So I'm in Alberta in Canada. So we wouldn't get a ton of shows through here. You get, I mean, whatever, but, you just always heard about this band, Fugazi. And so finally, as I was a bit older and I checked them out, I was just like dumbfounded even now, right?
Yeah.
And to go back and watch those old show videos that are on YouTube and whatever, and just be like, oh, that just looks like a time.
It really was. And, you know, the videos are great, but I don't want to be this guy, but you kind of had to be there a little bit.
For sure. Yeah.
But it was just so formative, and just like really just set the course for like literally my entire life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then, do you remember the first time hearing about Polyvinyl? I feel like you were probably there from pretty darn near the beginning.
Yeah, it was the beginning.
Yeah.
The first Braid show was in 1993 in Danville, Illinois, which was near Champaign-Urbana, which is where I was going to college.
Right.
And I got down there and we started, the band started, I met some people down there. The band started pretty quickly, and we played our first show in December that first year, and it was in Danville, and Matt Lunsford from Polyvinyl set up the show. He was friends with Todd and Roy, who were in Braid. They like skate, they were like part of a skate crew, and they would go to shows and stuff. So this was before Polyvinyl even existed. He started doing a zine. After that, Polyvinyl started as a zine.
Yeah.
And then he started doing records, you know, I think maybe after the third or fourth zine, he started doing records. But yeah. And then Braid was one of the first bands he put out a 7-inch by. So yeah, it was right from the beginning. We were
that's awesome.
I was pretty connected. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say maybe, real quick, and maybe you kind of touched on this just by talking, you know, about going and seeing Fugazi and stuff like that. But when you started Braid, what was kind of I don't know if like the idea is the right thing to say, because I mean, Braid's kind of become, you know, they're one of those influential bands, right? That like influence the next generation. I don't know if, you know, if I think it's fair to say that. So when going in and starting the band, what was kind of your game plan, I guess, because you weren't just going and recreating what you had heard, right? Like from other bands.
No, I mean, not really, but maybe sort of. It wasn't like we were trying to copy other bands, but we definitely took what we loved about Fugazi and what we loved about Jawbox and what we loved about Hoover and what we loved about Jawbreaker, to be honest, and that's what sort of came out when we started Braid.
Right.
You know, it took a little while. Like our first few shows, we were pretty terrible. We were, I think, trying to, and this was the first band I ever like played guitar in. I was in a bunch of bands before that, but I was playing drums.
Sure. Yeah.
So I wasn't super used to playing guitar and singing and being in front. And I think we were trying really hard to be an exciting live band more than we were trying to be a good band.
Right.
Musically speaking.
Yeah.
So that was that. I mean, we were just, taking everything we were taking in and really loving and trying to do our spin on it.
Sure. So let's jump in then to the 5 records that you picked from Polyvinyl. We're going to kind of go back and forth a little bit, because I thought it'd be fun if you shared we go through the 5, but also in the meantime, I go through some of the stuff that you put out that I love.
Amazing.
So yeah, we'll do a bit of a back and forth. But the first one that I wanted to bring up that you sent me is kind of different because as far like it's a compilation, but that feels like a stretch to call it a compilation.
It's yeah.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, because compilations obviously played a huge part in the growth of, the scene, especially through the 90s. And we've talked about a number of kind of like pivotal compilations or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But this was just released a couple years ago, or even
last
year. Yeah. So the album I'm talking about is Exquisite Corpse.
Yeah.
And I guess why I say it's kind of a compilation, can you explain what is happening here? Because there are a ton of familiar names, but they're all over the place.
My cat wants to join.
Oh, that's fair. I should get my cat.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the pandemic rage of last year, right around this time last year, as you probably know, a lot of labels and bands and things like Bandcamp were doing all these reactionary fun things to help musicians or to keep musicians creative and occupied and tuned in and switched on, because it was kind of a bummer time for everyone. I had a new record coming out. I had tours booked. Obviously they all got canceled. So Polyvinyl, it was actually Kaya Fisher from Raina Maria came up with this idea to do a project where they basically sent an email to everybody who had ever put out anything on Polyvinyl and said, we have this idea, do you want to be a part of it? What we're going to do is everyone who wants to be in this is going to be split up into bands. And then you are going to find out who's in your band and you're going to write and record a song in your own, however you want to do that. And then we're going to have TJ from Aloha did some of the mastering and stuff that I think had to be done to it. And then we're going to release it. And so that's what it is. It's like, I think it's 12 or 13 songs, and each song is by a different band of people, but the bands they don't exist. Like these aren't bands that exist. Like for instance, my band was me and Tankard, Jess,
and she was in Now.
Yeah,
or used to be in Now. Yeah.
Yep, and Luke from Anamanaguchi.
Okay.
And James Alex from Beach Slang.
Okay, yeah.
And so we all got on this email chain, and we were just like, here's what I can record. Here are my capabilities. Jess was like, I could play bass too, so what I did is I wrote this sort of very, very bare bones demo-y type thing, sent it to everybody. Jess came back, added something else, added a vocal melody to it, and it sort of went from there. What I really wanted for our song was, I think the idea of an Exquisite Corpse art project, right, is you see like the edge of, like somebody draws something and then they pass it to the next person, and they'll see part of it, and then they'll continue the drawing without knowing the beginning part. They didn't really give us any instructions to like do anything like that, where it's just like pass it along. We just decided right from the beginning, it was like, well, let's make a song. Let's all get together and make a song. And I had this idea. I wanted me to sing one verse, and then Jess to sing one verse, and then James to sing one verse. And I thought that would be fun. Yeah. But James didn't want to sing. He didn't want to sing on it.
That's fair, I guess.
But he did play some guitar on it, which was cool. But anyway, so I was happy with how our song came out. Yeah. And then when I got the finished product, I was just blown away. Some of the songs are kind of a mess, but I think it's because maybe they just went at it a different way. They took it where it was like, I'm going to write the first half, and then I'll pass it to you, and you write the second half, and so forth. But then there are some songs that you can tell they just got together and they're like, well, let's make a cohesive song. And there's a song in there called Some Storms. Yeah. it's awesome. It's Matt Pryor sings it.
Yeah.
But it's Matt Pryor. It's Nick from Mr. Heavenly.
Okay.
And Aaron, who is in Headlights or Psychic Twin, I think. But yeah, it's just like so well done.
So with that album, was what like a person, were they only on one song? Because I know like this, they like listed them by band, right? So like, or I mean, in your case, it was your name, but like the Get Up Kids appear on there a couple of times, but I'm assuming it's just different members of the Get Up Kids appearing on different songs.
Correct.
No, that was pretty great. When I first opened it, I was like, what is this? And like the first name,
it's tough to explain.
Yeah, well, the first name that I saw come up was Pedro the Lion, and I was like, oh, I love. Did it say Pedro or did it say David?
Mine said David Bazan.
Yeah, either or. Like Bazan's one of my all-time favorite songwriters, and so to like see the name, I'm like, okay, but what is happening here? Because you put the song on, and I don't hear a David Bazan song, right? So like, I don't know what he did on that song exactly, but
I don't know.
But yeah, it's a pretty unique idea, and so what is it about that particular album that makes is it just the whole experience that you had with it that makes it kind of so special?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's my experience with it, but it's this sort of experience that everybody was having because we felt this kinship and community. We were all going through, something unique and awful, but this was some way to channel our creativity into something really, really cool and unique and special.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I wanted. Hopefully they do it again this year.
Yeah,
let's do it again. I'll be in a new band.
You're right. Yeah, there you go. And I assume as like a songwriter, it's kind of just a different, a unique sort of experience in doing something completely different than how I'm assuming you would normally do it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I help run this website called Downright, where artists are on there being commissioned to do songs. So a lot of times you're getting somebody's story and then you write a song about it. So I like those sort of challenges. And this was definitely one of them, to do the Exquisite Corpse, where it's just you're out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're surprise yourself with what you come up with.
That's awesome. Let's move into, I guess, discussing more of your writing, because the first record I wanted to talk about from your library came a few years after Braid had been going, but also right before they were done the first time. But I want to talk about the album Frame and Canvas.
Yeah.
And so this record for me, this is what we'll get into, I guess, my introduction to your catalog of work in a little bit, because this wasn't it. It was actually Hey Mercedes that introduced me to your music. And I can remember hearing Hey Mercedes and people going, but yeah, have you heard Braid? Because basically this is Braid. And I'm like, okay. So Braid was this name that I carried around with me forever, of this band that was, that was no longer around. And it actually took until reading, are you familiar with the book Post by Eric Grubbs? Yeah. So I think there was a whole chapter on you guys in there. And so in one thing I love to do when reading books that are, about music, and whether it's scenes or like genre, subgenres, whatever, is as I'm going through it, like kind of listening to the music that's specifically being brought up. So, the entire time I'm reading a chapter about Braid, I'm listening to Braid, right? And so that was my first actual real introduction. I had Eric on the podcast quite some time ago.
Amazing.
Yeah, and that book still, I talk about it so much. So if anyone's listening,
I think he's working on another one too.
Yes, he is. I don't know. He's told me.
I should have said that.
No. I think he actually said it when I had him on the podcast as well. I was just trying to think if he had a name for it, which I don't recall. But anyway, so in reading that book is kind of what really introduced me to this record. And it's so funny, because as I went through, I can only imagine how different it is to listen to a band years after, their catalog has come out. Right. And so I had the ability to kind of go through, and as I'm reading this chapter, start with, the earlier records and move all the way up through Frame and Canvas. And of course, when that book was written, you guys hadn't gotten back together. Because I think that came out in 2008 or whatever. So you hadn't gotten back together yet. But to kind of hear the progression of the band, because you kind of had, I like to describe it as like a bit of an angular sound, and I feel like you kind of held on to that with just like whether it's, you know, like time signature changes or just doing, you know, in a time when skate punk was blowing up, you weren't doing skate punk, right? Like you were doing something that was a little different. And but by the time Frame and Canvas came around, you were kind of like smoothing those edges out. What do you think was kind of, I guess, leading to that? Like, it's not like you shifted your sound. Was it just that you sort of more found your sound, you think, by that point?
Yeah, for sure. When we recorded Frame and Canvas, and when we were writing those songs, we were on tour constantly. I mean, I remember writing one of the songs, Never Will Come For Us, on tour, like just before a show, Chris and I like just playing acoustic guitar. So we just became a more cohesive, smoother unit, working together, and through playing all the shows, I think we maybe fine-tuned the music to play live. What I'm trying to say is that we were excited to play live. Obviously, we couldn't stop touring. We toured all the time. So when it came time to write a new record, I think we always were thinking about, well, how is this going to sound live? Right. How is it going to be heard? How are we going to be able to play it? And is it going to confuse people, or is it going to be an energetic, wild ride that everyone can enjoy? Right. So I think that probably had something to do with it.
When writing for Braid, especially like at this time, what, like, I don't know how to ask this, and maybe I was trying to ask it earlier too, but what goes into, I guess, the process of what does writing a Braid song look like? Because, you know, I mentioned like the different, you know, like you'll be going one way and then like a 90-degree turn, you're going another way, sort of thing. Like when you sit down to write a song with Braid, do you have that in mind, going like, okay, let's throw them, you know, a bit of a loop here, or is it more just you're just jamming and it comes out?
No, it's kind of a lot like how I was describing the Exquisite Corpse band working. When we wanted to work on a song, we very, very rarely jammed. And I really disliked that. I didn't think it was very productive for us, at least. So we very much thought about writing music in terms of the song, and then sometimes where a song would be in sequence on the album.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we would decide, well, if this song's first, then it needs to be this particular way, because this is how we want to grab people's attention, or just at least make a first impression.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were always aware of how the song was going to be completed while we were writing it, if that makes any sense. It was never like, let's just go on this journey and see where it takes us. And some bands do that, and they're awesome at it and make great music. But for us, and we just worked better within that framework.
Sure.
Of deciding what we wanted to be making, and then we would make it.
Yeah. Right on. So let's move on to your next Polyvinyl release, which is from Of Montreal. Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer? Yeah. First and foremost, that is a title. Yeah, that is an album title. Yeah. What makes
some of those titles are weird, are wild as well.
Yeah. What makes this record stand out for you?
It stands out for me because it came out at a really interesting time in my life. I had just started working for Threadless, which was a company here in Chicago, and was given, I don't know, I think they leaned on me a lot because I had a lot of music connections. Right. And so when I was doing marketing or partnerships or stuff like that, or wanted to find labels or bands to work with, I was kind of the go-to guy to be like, yeah, you're friends with that person, bring them in, or let's do something with them. Yeah. And so I felt an enormous amount of like freedom when I was like going to shows, or like seeing bands play, or when friends of mine were coming through town on tour, I would bring them into the warehouse, go pick out a bunch of shirts. this was kind of around the time that the record Hissing Fauna came out, and I remember going to see them play here at the Metro with some people from work, from Threadless, and being struck by how catchy they were, but also like how complex
Yeah.
the songs were.
Yeah.
And they, when I was, that album really hit it home. And what it was cool to me that it was on polyvinyl, because polyvinyl seemed to be, and they still are, really on like the pulse of what was going on and what was happening and what was cool, and exciting. And this was an exciting record, and it was like, it's fun, it's catchy, you can like dance to it. And I was also DJing at the time at like this restaurant here in Chicago, and you could play out Montreal, and you don't feel, it's not like you feel like you're trying to get the dance floor moving, but everyone's gonna be bopping their heads and having a good time.
Yeah, this was my first time. I want to say my first time listening to Of Montreal. The name has been one that I've been
forever.
Yeah, I've been familiar with for a while, but this is the first time I put them on. And this record, that I was trying to figure out, I was like, how do you describe it? And I think when you said, like it's catchy, but it's also complex, makes me feel like, okay, like what I'm hearing makes a little more sense, because like what I wrote down for my one note is this record sounds like if the Beatles stayed together but dabbled in some 70s funk and then some 80s like synth pop new wave sort of thing, because it's got all sorts of like influences, and then it'll be like this kind of like upbeat dancey sort of thing going on, and then all of a sudden it shifts and it gets a little psychedelic, and I mean the album artwork itself is psychedelic, so it's kind of this cool mix. At least this record, I couldn't speak for the rest of their discography, but like it's also a little lo-fi on the on the sound I found, but yeah, no, it was an interesting listen. I think that
good. I think they've been around for a long time, and when that record came out, they had been around for kind of a while. So what I had found was the records before that were a little more psychedelic and pop.
Right. Okay.
And the ones after that got really sort of experimental and avant-garde, and kind of not into them as much.
Yeah.
But this was the one, I think, where it's just they were really firing on all cylinders. It was such a fun thing to listen to.
Hit the sweet spot for you.
It did.
That's pretty awesome. So let's move this record, actually. So we're going to move into another one of yours. And I should have said that Braid Frame and Canvas was actually released on polyvinyl. So it kind of fits in the mold. This one was not, however. Hey Mercedes Loses Control. Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned earlier, this was the album that introduced me to your work, and eventually what would introduce me to Braid as well.
Okay.
And it came out at a time where, basically anything that was on Vagrant Records, I was going to go and I was going to buy it, or at least check it out. Right.
Cool. Yep.
And so what was the thought behind so let's take us through Hey Mercedes becoming a thing, because Hey Mercedes, I believe, was it an EP or something along those lines, was released on polyvinyl, and then you eventually made a jump. So what was the idea behind starting Hey Mercedes?
In 1999, Braid broke up initially. And pretty soon after we decided we were going to break up, three of us decided we still wanted to be in a band together. Because there was one guy, Chris, who wanted to do different things. Yeah. And so we kind of wanted to keep going. And so because we had been a band for so long and done so much touring and recording and stuff, we didn't want to just be Braid without Chris. Yeah. So we decided to start a new band. And that's when Hey Mercedes started. And so that EP came out in 2000. Mm-hmm. And then on polyvinyl. And then Braid had, in 1998 and 97, toured a lot with the Get Up Kids. Okay. Like literally 100 shows. Yeah. We played with Get Up Kids and went to Europe with the Get Up Kids. Became really great friends with them. So when Hey Mercedes started in 2000, they had already signed to Vagrant. and they were like, "Hey, get on board. We'll
Yeah.
introduce you to people. We will put in whatever word for you need. That." And so Hey Mercedes actually flew out to California and played some shows and met all the Vagrant people.
Yeah.
And then so then we decided to do 2 records with Vagrant then.
Yeah. And so I mean, and maybe you touched on this a little bit when you said, when you changed the name to Hey Mercedes because you didn't just want to be Braid minus a guy, was like, because I feel like this music from Hey Mercedes is it fair to say that it was a little more straightforward, or I don't want to use the word commercial necessarily, but like were you guys going for a different sound in this, or like intentionally, or is it just, again, sort of what was coming out?
It really I believe it was what was coming out. And I've said before, if Braid did stick together, the next Braid album probably would have sounded a decent amount like Every
Right.
Night Fireworks, the first Hey
Yeah.
Mercedes record.
Yeah.
I just think it was a natural progression of the music we were making because we never stopped touring. And yeah, we just started to get into that just vibe of wanting to play live songs that we could play live and that would sound good live
Yeah.
in that sort of
Yeah.
context. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you notice like a bump at all in being on Vagrant, like especially at that time? Because Vagrant was like, I mean, by that point, I guess you'd had Something to Write Home About was out, Places You Have Come to Fear the Most was out, like those big records that kind of really shot Vagrant to the moon were out. But did you notice something kind of riding that wave?
Oh yeah. Oh, 100%. Because one of the first things that we did once we signed to Vagrant, they were doing this tour, this Vagrant America tour, it was called.
Yeah.
And it was, all of the bands. It was Alkaline Trio and Reggie and Get Up Kids and Saves the Day and Dashboard and Anniversary and Hot Rod Circuit
Yeah.
and Hey Mercedes. And we were on buses.
Yeah.
And they were playing we were playing big places. And it just was a complete shock. We had never been on a bus before, a tour bus, and definitely hadn't played too many huge shows like this, but these were like really big shows and big productions.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a bump in that we were playing to a lot more people.
Yeah. This record is one. It's interesting because I've referenced this a few times on the podcast, but I went through a season in life where I kind of had stopped listening to most of like the stuff I grew up as a kid. I was like, I went through this phase. I'm like, nah, I've grown out of pop punk and punk rock and, all this sort of stuff. But there were a few records that really stuck with me still through that time. And Loses Control was one of them. And it was one that actually I brought up going back to the beginning of the whole pandemic thing when, everyone was doing different sort of fun, weird things. We did a handful of episodes where we reached out to artists and got them to share a couple albums that they felt were underrated. Mm-hmm. And then we shared some ourselves, and actually Hey Mercedes Loses Control. Because the whole idea was, hey, you got time on your hands. Why not check out some new music that maybe you haven't heard before? And so this record was one that I brought up, and it's one that has stayed kind of like as a regular visitor, I suppose you could say, in my rotation. Yeah, it's... So thanks. Yeah, thanks for putting it out. But let's move on now to your next Polyvinyl record, which would be not yours, but your next pick, which would be Owen, No Good for No One Now.
Yeah.
So, of course, this is Mike Kinsella. I was introduced... I'm trying to think if I actually heard Owen first or if American Football would have been it. Either or. It was probably around the same time, because probably similar to when I heard Hey Mercedes and people were like, yeah, but have you heard about Braid?
Sure.
But so what makes this record stand out for you?
Well, Mike is somebody who I've known for a long time because my band in high school, Friction, played a lot of shows with his band in high school, Captain Jazz. We both played drums for those bands.
Okay.
But he actually went to Champaign-Urbana as well. He was a year younger than I am.
Okay.
So he came after that. and he put out an EP. It was weird when he started doing acoustic stuff.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but maybe feel like, oh, everybody's doing this. I was doing it, like playing acoustic shows and just because you were trying it out.
Yeah.
And maybe I think at first that was his deal. And even his first EP or his first album that he put out that was on Polyvinyl, he would probably say it's not maybe that great.
Yeah.
Or it sounds like somebody kind of figuring it out. But when I've heard No Good for No One Now, which I'm pretty sure is his second album, it like just completely changed my whole like I don't know what happened to him. How he became so incredibly sophisticated at guitar,
right,
and singing.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not like and writing lyrics.
Yeah,
because none of those three things were part of what I assumed he was awesome at. Because he's always an incredible drummer.
Sure.
And just like the rhythm that was just incredible. And so, I mean, when I first heard this, I thought, and he does all the instruments on it. In fact, I think on most, if not all, the Owen albums, he does all the instruments on. I was just completely blown away because I wasn't really expecting much. I thought it was always just, another guy with an acoustic guitar, just like I am sometimes. And it is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
But no, it was just like a complete sonic joy to listen to.
It's interesting to listen to some of his work as Owen because, like, I mean, obviously that first American football album gets a ton of recognition, which it deserves. But like lyrically, that record, it never really did a ton for me. Like it always felt like, well, we're singing, we have lyrics because we need to sing something in a lot of ways. Whereas, like this record especially, I've only really dabbled a little bit in Owen, but this record, listening to it, like just how deeply personal it gets at times, and just how like he doesn't shy away, from approaching some of this lyrical content, but and then you don't.
He still. I mean, he put out a record last year.
Yeah, I was gonna say he had one out last year that was really good as well. But like to double down on that with, as you mentioned, like his guitar work, like just the thing I love, I think, about Owen when I put it on and listen, any of the albums really, is that it reminds me of, what I fell in love with American football, kind of meshing a little bit, and maybe this is like a cop-out to say, but with like Elliott Smith sort of vibes. Just his voice is so delicate, for one, which I find is pretty similar between those two. And then, just to get, again, very raw and very to the point in what he's saying. It's a great listen, but
it's great. And I was able to do some touring with Mike. We went to Europe twice and did just like touring in a car. So,
right on.
It's like it's just the best. Like we brought our girlfriends with us, and it was just like a vacation, a fun vacation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's move back to one of your records, which I mentioned it briefly earlier. Braid No Coast. So, okay, this is where I gotta be open and honest. I absolutely, I don't know why I need to say this, I love this record to death. Like,
oh, cool.
From the first time I
didn't know where you were going with that. It's like,
that's why I was like, I don't know if I need to say this. Yeah, this record is horrible. Why did you put it out? No, because here's the thing. I think a lot of times, and maybe you felt this in the past too with different bands, but when bands break up for a while or go on hiatus or whatever, and then they come back, and that record that comes out, sometimes it just doesn't live up to what you're hoping for, right? And the thing I think the thing I love about this record, and maybe in when you mentioned, with Hey Mercedes, that if Braid had stayed together, you feel like that, that next Hey Mercedes record or whatever would have been very similar to what Braid would have put out. Because what I find with this album is that those Hey Mercedes records really kind of like play a nice transition into the sound on this record, because I feel like the production got a lot cleaner in Hey Mercedes, and so you have that value on No Coast, but then you also have a lot of those Braid sort of signature pieces and what, but it just feels like a really nice mix between Hey Mercedes and earlier Braid stuff, and it just gets pulled off so well. So, yeah, and it's forever going to have a place in my brain because last year we drove. So I live in Western Canada, and we drove all the way across Canada because, you know, there's a pandemic. What else are you going to do? You know, got nothing going on. So let's hop in an RV and drive to visit my family on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
And that was where I actually really discovered this record again in reading posts by Eric Grubbs, diving into Braid and seeing like, oh shoot, you guys had something that came out not too long ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's forever just going to be stuck in my brain as like this drive across Canada that I listened to it so many times. But why don't, how did that album come to be? Because like you guys, you know, you broke up in 99, you said you kind of went on and did separate things. Where did that all come back together, and how did that come to be?
Well, around 2010, 2009, 2010, like Chris Broach, who was the other guitar player in Braid, who was not in Hey Mercedes.
Yeah.
He sort of returned. Like he was like gone for a while. It wasn't. I mean, he didn't go anywhere. He just wasn't around. He just wasn't around. Didn't hang out. Yeah. Wasn't playing shows or whatever, and so nobody really saw him. And then around, like I said, 2009, he sort of came back, and we reconnected, and we actually started DJing together. At a bar, just doing, you know, like punk rock night or whatever. Yeah. And one night just was like, should we just start? We actually tried to start a new band with a friend of ours, and it wasn't working so well, but we were just like, maybe we should try and write some Braid songs. And Todd and Damon were into it, and we did like an EP. Actually, the EP is on Polyvinyl.
Oh, right on. That's funny. There you
go. Closer to Closed. But then we did, then we decided to do the full album, which was on Top Shelf. And it's, you know, I'm glad you mentioned the idea that a lot of times when bands go on these long hiatuses and they come back, and sometimes they sound tired, I don't know, or old. Yeah. I was very, very concerned about that. We all were. To not want to sound like old. Yeah. I wanted it to be very, very energetic and like youthful, like kind of how we were, because I really just didn't want it to sound like adult contemporary Braid.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something too about just getting, and I watched a short little documentary that's up on YouTube that must have been, I think it was probably came out before the record, as a bit of a promo thing, but and I don't know if it was you or if it was Chris or someone else who had said, you know, just as you get better at your instruments and better at what you're doing, like you typically, you know, write better songs or something along those lines, because it is just interesting when bands take some time off and they come back and you just go, oh, like there's part of it, I think a lot of times is longing for what was, you know, and when bands have been around for a while and they make, you know, they kind of evolve their sound. That happens a lot too. You see people freak out when things sound different, right? But then like just getting better at your instruments, I think definitely plays a part too, right? Like the more you play, the more comfortable and the better you're essentially going to be. So I think it really comes across. And I was talking with there's a friend of mine, his name's Danny. He hosts a podcast called 5 Songs or Less. And I just mentioned, I said, hey, you know, I'm interviewing Bob Nanna from Braid. Any questions that you guys want asked or whatever? And then we just ended up having a discussion about No Coast. And I think he said specifically, he's like, easily the best comeback record of all time. Oh, and wow. Which, I mean, obviously that's going to be, you know, completely up to whoever's listening to it, but and what, you know, what world you come from, but it's such a solid record. Like it is my go-to if I'm listening to Braid, which is funny to say because, you know, all like Framing Canvas is one of those ones that just gets brought up and I'm like, yeah, but No Coast, these guys can still go. Like it's fantastic. So
awesome. Thanks.
Let's move into your next Polyvinyl pick, which was Pele the Nudes. Yeah. So yeah, tell me about this band. Why this record stands out?
Well, Pele, I love this record. Pele's from Milwaukee, which is nearby, and so they became. Or I think they were friends of ours. They had been for a while, and we just knew them, and we're friends with them, so we saw them play a lot. Why I love this record in particular is it's all instrumental.
Yeah.
And it's a three-piece, and each member is insanely talented.
Like ridiculous.
Yeah, and what I just love I loved that they were able to pull off a record of songs that I honestly believe are really catchy, but they're instrumental.
Yeah.
And also they sort of know their space. It's not jazzy.
Yeah.
It's like, rock, like, but there's like noodly parts in it, but it's not like jazzy. It's not, pretentious.
Yeah.
And I'm not, whatever. I'm not saying jazz is pretentious, but you know what I mean? Sometimes it can go there.
Jazz nerd.
Where it's just like, we're just we're better at this than you are. And
for sure. 100%. Yeah.
This sort of brought it down to a level that a dude like me who likes rock bands or whatever could be like really impressed by it.
Yeah.
And also
go ahead. Yeah.
Well, what's cool is the two of the members, the guitar player Chris and the drummer John, play in the band now called Volcano Choir.
Okay.
That Justin Vernon sings in.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like Pele with Bon Iver singing.
Damn,
it's awesome. Go check that out.
Yeah, you said it was called Volcano Choir. I'm literally opening up Apple Music right now because that sounds. I haven't listened to Bon Iver in quite some time,
dude,
but
listen to the newest. There's two Volcano Choir records, and the second one is called Repave.
We are adding it right now. Are you saying listen to Repave? Is that the one you're recommending?
Album?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my God.
It's added now.
Yeah. There's a song on there called Bygone that was by far one of my favorite songs of that year that it came out.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pele, you said you went on a little YouTube.
Yeah, so I was going to say I went on like a rabbit trail or whatever of YouTube live videos. There's not really many of them. Yeah. But I couldn't wipe the stupid grin off my face watching. You mentioned John Mueller, the drummer. Watching that guy play drums, I was like, he's fun. Like he's insane. Like he's so good, and then B, he just like looks like he's having the time of his life and also incredibly relaxed. I feel like I'm trying to think if the name of the song is it like Nude Beach Pinhole Camera or something along those lines. And as he's playing this, it looked like it was on maybe like some, you said they're from Milwaukee, right? Yeah. So I feel like it was like some like local Milwaukee blog entertainment sort of thing that had done, they're performing in a studio. And I swear the whole time he's just got his like eyes closed, but a smile on his face, and he's just going off. And they're so much fun to watch. And when I first put it on, I did one of those things where I'm like, okay, when does the singing start? Like I like instrumental music. Like there's a ton of post-rock bands that I can get really into that, I very much have to be in the mood. But I think when you say like it's catchy, you have a point, because listening to this felt less like once I realized what was happening, it felt less like I was waiting for those vocals or thinking like, oh man, because a lot of post-rock bands, I'm like, this would be so amazing if someone was singing over top of this, right? Yeah. I didn't get that with this band because they're doing, I think, and everything's so well and enough of it that, like the songs, you bring up the jazzy thing. That was one of the things that I kind of like noted as like, especially watching John play drums.
He's got that style.
Yeah, I was like, he clearly looks like either he grew up as a jazz drummer or has fallen in love with it, learned it at some point in time, but he has that free flowing style that I think, a lot of jazz drummers definone have. Yes. And so, this was a rad album. And when I was like looking it up, was it, who was, someone from The Promise Ring, right? Was originally in the band. I think I saw.
Don't know that. I know it's three people. It's Matt Tennyson, Chris Rosano, and John Mueller.
Scott Schoenbeck used to be in the band, I guess.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So what did I read?
he plays for Dashboard now.
Yeah.
I didn't
So
know
it says, what after? Where does it say this? Early in Pele's career? No, I want the beginning because I think he was like, yeah. The group formed in the summer of '97 by guitarist Chris Rosenow, bassist Scott Schoenbeck, and drummer John Mueller.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was like, really? And I feel like I saw their name come up somewhere else as well. Like I was like just going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole as well, but I don't remember what the connection was. But yeah, so I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I had to double check. I was like, is Scott still in Dashboard? Because which is funny because last time I saw Dashboard live, I was like, I swear it's an entirely different band because he just doesn't look anything like he did, when, getting to know Dashboard in the early 2000s, right? But
right.
Yeah. Let's move on to a record that you mentioned earlier that you released last year, Celebration States.
Yes.
So you kind of alluded a little bit to it in that you had a new record coming out, you had a tour planned, and the world shut down.
Yeah.
What does that do to an artist? Because I've never been in that, I've played in bands, but never been in bands that, we had records come out and tours and all this sort of stuff. So like that typical cycle obviously gets broken. So what does a musician do in that state?
Well, I'm probably an atypical musician in the sense that I don't tour that much, and I love touring. I will tour all year long if I could, but it's not my main source of income, and I don't think I've made money on any tours I've done in the past 3-4 years. But so it's more like a love thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Labor of love sort of thing, as opposed to being like my main income source, which it isn't.
Yeah.
So I really felt for Dashboard, for instance, and Get Up Kids. They were on tour. Yeah. When it all shut down, they had to just turn around and go home. Or Mike Kinsella, American Football, I think they just canceled another tour. So I just saw, but so it didn't hit me the way that it would hit those bands that were really counting on the just whatever the experience, the money, that part of their schedule or that year. But for me, it's a bummer. I had I was going to play in South America for the first time.
Yeah.
Obviously that got canceled.
Did you end up doing any like live stream sort of stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. You know how, we're saying, pandemic, you'd start trying to pull rabbits out of hat, like trying to do whatever you can. Well, I decided to do this like Instagram live series of videos where I showed you how to play each song on Celebration States.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would come on during the day. I did the 10 days leading up to its release. I did this, and I was like, I played the song, and then I just showed you how to play it. Because the whole album is just me and a guitar.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's amazing.
Thank you.
And you also, I just saw the video for Mr. Albatross today.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great because your cat made it
in this apartment.
Yeah, I was going to say your cat made an appearance earlier in this episode, which is great because your cat's in the video.
She's all over and I didn't place her in it. She was just always there.
Even when she's on the chair where it's just like an instrumental section and, the cat's sitting on the chair.
Well, that's the sort of thing where it's just like the chair, because when I was filming that, I had to leave the chair where it was because I was moving it, I think like 14 inches every day towards the back door.
Oh, were you okay, interesting. Like I noticed like some of the shots, it kind of like changed a little bit, but so you were intentionally like moving it away
14 inches.
Okay.
No, not moving. No, the camera moved too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So the camera was always the same distance from the chair, but the whole thing,
that's
rig moved.
Slowly making your way out the door.
Slowly making my way out the door. But so the chair was always sitting there, and just oftentimes I would come out of my room or something, and she would just be laying on it. And I'd be like, well, all right, we're going to film your scene now.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, it's a fun little idea for a video because I'm assuming it cost you next to nothing to make it. Did you did you do the whole did you edit it and everything or was it okay. So
New Granada, the label to put it out, they wanted to see. They thought, maybe you should try and do like a pandemic type video for it. And I was like, I just sat and thought about it. And I was like, I have this weird idea, and I come up with weird ideas sometimes. But I was glad that I was able to make that work.
Yeah, it would have been great. I saw someone who commented, "It's like, oh, you should have grown a beard during the filming."
I did.
Of it. Did you?
I did at the beginning. I'm clean shaven.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, whatever. I grew what beard I could grow.
I was gonna say what you got. Yeah, by the end of it, you weren't like a bushman or something. But
no.
It's a great video. And the record, I love it.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think when, like, I think that one I was following you on Twitter by the time it came around, so I added it and listened to it, and I love finding. Because so much of the music that I listen to is definitely more on the energetic full band side, right? Like it's just the way what I'm attracted to, but I also love hearing those albums that are like I like falling in love with a singer's or a songwriter's style of songwriting in one genre and then being able to see it and hear it in another sound that's just like so to be able to hear these songs kind of like in a different sound, but still being able to go, oh, this is clearly Bob Nanna, not just because you're singing, but your writing style, right? Like, I mentioned Dave Bazan earlier in the episode, and he's a writer that regardless of the sound of his music that he's putting out, you can tell a Dave Bazan song from all other songs. And I feel like, you've got your own unique writing style. So it's nice to be able to, it's also one that I like to listen to at night. I like to joke. So I have this set of Bluetooth headphones that are like built into a headband essentially. So the idea is you can lay in bed with these headphones on and it doesn't like, so they're like the lamest thing when I think about it, but I love the idea of especially going back and, like listening to say whether it's like old post-hardcore bands, like let's say Fugazi for instance. I'm like laying in bed listening to Fugazi on these like headband headphones, and I'm like, this is what Ian and Guy were picturing when they were writing these songs, is dude listening on his ridiculous headphones. But
exactly.
So let's move into the final record on the list, and I left this one for last because you sent it to me right away as you're like, this one I know is on the list. And it's by Aloha, and the album is Here Comes Everyone. Yeah. So what makes this record stand out for you?
Well, it is one of my favorite records of all time. Aloha is one of my favorite bands of all time. And first of all, the record starts with, I can't think of another record that starts with a perfect 5-pack of songs. Like the first 5 songs are just perfect.
Yeah.
This band and this album just hit me in all of the right ways because there's a little bit of jazziness to it. Mm-hmm. Yep. There's some time signature weirdness. There's immense, just really great tuneful guitar work and piano work. I really love the singer's voice, Tony. His voice has a not paper thin quality. He's got an airiness to it. Yeah. But still has a little bit of soul to it. Like, you can hear like vibrato sometimes. So it's not like he's aware. I think he's aware of the space that his voice is taking up in the songs. And then lyrically, the one thing I think that's kind of maybe a bummer about the album is you can't hear some of the lyrics as well as I would want to, because if you read along, the lyrics they're so good. The first line of the first song is, first of all, the song starts with this nuts crazy drum thing. So cool. Yeah. But the first line is, "You're alive thanks to a strange chain of events that started with the death of Elvis." And it's just like, it's just sort of like, wow, where are we going now with this? It's so well done. Yeah.
Vocally, it's funny because that is one of the things I noticed were the vocals, but all I like kept getting was, or all I could think of, is it reminded me of like, for whatever reason, early 70s, like folk sort of, like there was just something going on that felt very familiar,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. But this record did something to me that doesn't happen all the time. And it was actually specifically one song. The first time Perry Como Gold came on and I listened to it through, I immediately put it back on. Like typically when I listen to an album, I'm like, I want to listen to the album, right? Like, yeah, sure, there are standout songs, but I typically will just put something on and leave it on start to finish. But that song, there was something, because it's, most of it is just vocals and piano, very simple. And then the band comes in, I want to say 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the song, whatever it may be. But when they come in, they just like absolutely hammer you. And it's just so good. And like, I just remember the first time I listened to it, it was one of those things where I was like, oh, the band. So you kind of turn it up and then they like change something, they do something. You're like, oh shit. And you like turn it up more and you're like, what is going? It's such a good song. And,
that's such a good song too. And again, the lyrics are so good. There's a lyric that's like, everybody has something that they want to see torn down, but not these small homes that have walked on stilts. Or the roller rinks and bakeries that have shuttered up since Isabel. Like it's about a hurricane.
Yeah.
And it's like about beachside. It's so beautiful. You don't know that.
Yeah.
And until like halfway through the song, it's just beautiful.
Yeah. No, it was. This is always a fun little experiment that we've been doing, like with this series where we look at different record labels and then get artists to share their 5 favorites, because oftentimes, you know, they're very different from the 5 favorites that we may pick or whatever, right? So it's just a great opportunity. Like, it takes me back a little bit to, you know, like when I would have been first getting into, you know, any sort of punk music or whatever. Not that any of these records are really punk albums at all, but like, you know, like getting into that sound and those bands, it's just like people telling you, oh, you got to listen to this, you got to listen to this, you got to listen to this. And that still for sure happens. And I just feel though, that the day and age that we live in now with like digital streaming music, the thing that misses is like someone can tell you and then you put it on for a couple seconds and either it hooks you right away or it doesn't, right? We're in such like living in such a world or a time where it's just like you almost like you're looking for instant gratification, right? And like the thing is, like with streaming, it provides that for you, because you can literally go, no, that's no good, I'll move on to the next. There's no like real reason for someone to connect to something unless it grabs them immediately. But in doing something like this, where, you know, all 5 of these records, Owen was the only band that I'd ever listened to prior to this. All 5 of these records, it's just like someone else telling me how good something is, but then me having a reason to actually sit down and listen to it and going like, oh yeah. Like, so I love being able to come out of these things and go, you know, I'm not going to go back to every record necessarily, but bands like Aloha and bands like Pele, where I'm like, I'd never even heard of these bands.
Yeah.
And here they are listening to them. I'm just like, oh, like, why haven't I heard of these bands? Like, there is some legit stuff going on here. So it's a bit of a fun practice, to say the least.
Yeah, it was fun for me to do as well. I had some trouble picking. I mean, the other ones I wanted to pick, the Julia Jacklin record from last year was really great. Raina Maria put out really great records. The Owen record that's called At Home with Owen is incredible. I love it.
Yeah.
There really is a ton of good stuff on Polyvinyl, and they've been so great at, you know, just keeping up with not getting stuck in a pigeonholed in some genre or whatever. And it's very, very cool, and I'm so happy for them.
So I just realized it's very fitting over my shoulder.
I saw that immediately, and I was like, you just put that there, didn't you?
Well, it's funny because I did just put it there, but we did an episode recently on Equal Vision, and in the middle of the episode, I was like, I have an Equal Vision sticker hanging around somewhere. I don't know where it is. And then so I went to look for it. I found it, but with it was this Polyvinyl sticker, because I think it came with... I bought the anthology of emo books, which also is where like these like show posters came from or whatever. Cool. Which I believe you're in one of those. There's an
Yeah.
interview with you, so it's very
There is.
fitting. But yeah, so I was like, I should put it up. I got to do something with it.
Yeah,
I don't have any place to put stickers anymore, so they
Yeah,
just
good point.
they just go to waste, so they get tacked to the wall. But anyways, man, this was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
I was pumped that you'd do it. So thanks for sitting down.
No problem. Thank you for asking me. I'm glad we were able to